No gracias, no gracias, no gracias. Supposedly, those are the words that you need to say when passing through the dreaded shark tank at the Cancun Airport as you make your way outside through the maze of taxi drivers and airport transfer services. Don and I watched a lot of YouTube videos and we stayed up way too late reading the many do's and don'ts of flying into Mexico via the Cancun Airport. Stay tuned as I tell you what our experience was really like. Hi, I'm Nikki. Welcome to La Paz Bound, where I talk about my husband and I, along with our 5 pets, retiring early and moving to Mexico. I also talk about life in Tampa, paying down debt, downsizing and selling off our household goods, and my luxury purses and shoes. And if this type of content interests you, then please consider subscribing to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to tell you what it was like for my husband Don and I to fly into Mexico. So this is part 1 of a 2-part series on flying into and out of Cancun Airport. And if you've been following my channel for a while, then you know that this was our very first trip to Mexico with the main purpose of obtaining our temporary Mexican residency card. And if you're not familiar with our channel, I'll link our video to our trip to the Orlando Mexican consulate back in December and the frustrations and the hoops that we had to jump through to get that sticker in our passport. So Don and I currently reside in Tampa, Florida. And although we would have preferred to fly into La Paz to complete our canje, because that's where we eventually want to move to and retire to, we chose Cancun instead as it's much closer to Florida. And it's only a 90-minute plane ride. And we did this because we weren't sure how long we were going to need to stay in Mexico to complete the exchange of the sticker in our passport for our residency card. And getting to La Paz is a lot more time consuming with layovers either in Mexico City or Cabo San Lucas, possibly missing connections, not being familiar with what we needed to do to get to our next gate, not to mention the 3-hour time difference. It would have been at least an all-day trip, and seeing as this has been our first time to Mexico, we'd never been before, we weren't sure how a layover was going to factor into our canje process. We didn't want to be accidentally marked as tourist in our passport, which would have avoided everything that we had worked so hard to achieve for our Mexican residency. So that's why we chose that direct flight to the closest city in Mexico from Tampa. We also chose to purchase the Mexico relocation guide, mainly for the vetted contacts. And that's how we found our facilitator in Cancun, who was absolutely wonderful to work with. Unfortunately, per the relocation guide's policies, I can't share the name of our facilitator as it would forfeit access to the guide and to the private Facebook group. And I have to say that that Facebook group, it has been invaluable. So many helpful people in that group that have not only guided us and answered questions for us prior to us going to Mexico, but also told us exactly where to go and exactly what to do when we were leaving the Cancun Airport, which I will share in part 2. And as many of you have seen in my video of our first attempt of us trying to get to Mexico, it's very important to have all of your ducks in a row. Go check out that video to see what I mean. We were absolutely devastated the first time that we tried to attempt to go to Cancun. But we were successful on our second attempt. And not having children other than our fur babies, we are mostly tuned out to school holidays. I don't know when they are. So we didn't even think about spring break and how that would be a factor in our travel plans when we traveled the last week of March and the first week of April this year. When we got to the Tampa airport on our second attempt at going to Mexico, it was packed. more so than the 3 weeks prior to our first attempt. Security lines were like snaked around and they extended down to where you get off the tram that takes you to the gates. Same situation for just trying to get a cup of coffee and a pastry. And just like the previous attempt, we were once again called up by the gate agent when they were about to board the plane. And at this point, we just kind of shook our heads and were like, whatever. We had just been so stressed, not only during that 3-week time span between our first and our second attempt, but also for the past 6 months since we started our Mexican residency journey, that we were just prepared for the worst. And I made a video over how low and disappointed we were during that time frame, if you want to go watch that. On the surface, it may seem like we were just pissing and moaning about not being able to go to Mexico, but in reality, it goes deeper than that. It was about planning for our future and having options that would allow us to retire together and to be able to sustain ourselves and live comfortably in another country. And just like in any situation, it can be hard for people to have perspective on that unless you are going through that as well. Some of you have reached out to me during that time frame to support us and offer your kind words, and we really appreciate that. But turns out the gate agent, they just wanted to give us a paper ticket. So off we went. Everything was on time. The flight was quick. It was easy. It was very comfortable on JetBlue. We definitely recommend flying JetBlue. After flying over the most breathtaking water that I've ever seen in my life, we landed at the Cancun Airport and we followed the twists and the turns to get down to the escalator to go down to immigration. And we even stopped off at the restroom since everything we had watched and read led us to believe that the immigration line would be packed and that we would have a long wait. To our surprise, there were no lines in immigration, which was very well laid out with stanchions promoting the Mayan train. There were people there to guide you to the immigration booths. So we simply said "Kanhei" to an agent and he directed us to an entrance point. We knew beforehand not to go to the automated kiosks. That is just for tourists only. Our facilitator also mentioned not doing this. We had our passports and we had our paper ready to show the immigration officer. So we showed our paperwork first, which was verbiage our facilitator told us to print and show to the immigration officer. And it basically stated that we were in Mexico to complete our Kanhei and to please mark our passports with Kanhei 30. The immigration officer did exactly that. I don't even think that we exchanged words. It was such a quick and easy process for us. And again, this is just our experience. And if you're traveling to Cancun, you may have a longer line than we did in immigration, but I highly recommend if you're going to Mexico to complete your Kanhei that you have that printed sheet typed in Spanish that tells the agent why you are there and what you need them to do in your passport. I then contacted our facilitator on WhatsApp to let him know that we had gotten through immigration. He started working on our FMM. I don't think Dawn and I ever saw that in our file that our facilitator brought to our one and the same affidavit appointment, as well as the INM the next day. At least I don't remember seeing it. He had a lot of paperwork in our files, some of which he copied and he gave to us to keep. Once we got through immigration, we were a little confused on where to go and what we needed to do next. We didn't check any baggage, but we weren't sure if we were supposed to go through customs. There were quite a few armed guards around the baggage claim and customs area, and that's why I didn't film anything there. We walked down almost to the end of baggage claim to see if there were any signs as to where to go, any kind of exit signs. All the signs were in Spanish and English. We didn't see any exit signs, so we turned around and we walked past the customs area and we followed the taxi signs. Once we got past the baggage claim and customs, the airport seemed dead. We flew in on a Sunday and we landed around 1 p.m. But it was interesting to see the contrast of how the airport was laid out for arrivals versus departures, which I'll get to in part 2. We passed all the typical car rental names and some banks where you can exchange money. I'm going to do a separate video on our experience with finding and using an ATM. As we turned the last corner, we then saw those dreaded sliding glass doors. So behind these glass doors are people, they're trying to sell you timeshares. And what we watched and read led us to believe that it was going to be an aggressive, in-your-face experience. We had no problems here either.
Welcome, TikTokers. Hola.
Hola.
Bienvenidos.
We saw nothing but friendly, non-confrontational faces of people just holding up signs or just saying hello. Neither one of us was approached. Maybe it was because I had my camera turned on, but we definitely didn't experience anything like we had read or watched. Once we got outside, the taxi drivers were asking if we wanted a ride, but again, they weren't forceful about it. It was very crowded outside. It was a little chaotic trying to find our way through the crowd to get to our particular airport transfer service. And they all just kind of stand around, and you kind of have to be on the lookout for the company that you booked your shuttle through. I actually even asked another company where to find USA Transfer Service, and they were very kind, and they directed me to exactly where we needed to go. We gave the transfer service our name, we waited a few minutes, and then they wheeled our bag over to the private van, and off we went to our hotel. One thing to note about USA Transfer Service, that's if you use them, is that a few days before the flight, they actually emailed me stating that there was a lot of congestion around the Cancun Airport area and that there was one way in and one way out. And they indicated in the email that they had no missed pickups yet, but that there could be a longer wait for transportation. That didn't seem to be the case either. I think we were outside maybe a total of 10 to 15 minutes before getting into our van. I cannot stress enough what a pleasant experience it was getting through the Cancun airport on arrival. Again, maybe it was timing, maybe it's easier when you fly in on a Sunday, or maybe it was the time of year. I would think with spring break, it would have been a lot more crowded than it actually was. Have you been to the Cancun airport? What was your experience like flying in? Did you have a similar experience to ours? Share your story in the comments below because I would love to hear them. As always, thank you for watching. Please consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel so that I can bring you additional content. Until then, hasta luego, my friends.